This video is meant to show you everything, right? The whole story. We have a conference where ORF and ECS are initiating a collaboration, a very useful collaboration to the benefit of our two countries, to the benefit of the region, and to the benefit of the global south, capitalizing on the strategic partnership, the new strategic partnership, which is building on the old past relation between the two countries. And we have the living proof here in the two streets, the Nehru Street and the Nasser Street. This is enough in itself to show, to show the strength of the alliance between the two. We had three sessions yesterday and today, three closed sessions discussing the business investments, the Indian business investments in Egypt, discussing the potential areas of further collaboration, and discussing the Suez Canal Economic Zone, which is actually very important, very useful, and of critical importance to the whole region. And now we move to the fourth session. And the fourth session belongs to a category of its own, which is the category of distinguished lectures. Okay, and we're very, very privileged to have Dr. Samir Saran, President of Observer Research Foundation, as the primary speaker. The title of the session is "In a World of Volatile Geopolitics, What Can the Partnership Between India and Egypt Achieve?" So we're putting on the shoulders of India and Egypt the solution of the entire geopolitical situation in the region and in the world and in the future. It was just a very modest objective. Okay, no pressure. All right. We are going to start with some introductory remarks by Mr. Sanjoy Joshi, the chairman of ORF, and I'm very glad to say that these two guys here are not just members or leaders of a very important think tank in India, but they're also very good friends of mine. And this comes before any academic or any think tank relationship. Okay, we have three very distinguished commentators. We have His Excellency Ambassador Mohammad Higazi, former Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have Mr. Tariq Osman, author and senior political counselor for the Arab World, EBRD. And we have Mr. Ala Hashim, founder and executive partner of Transcendium and treasurer of ECS. So he's a very important guy for ECS. Okay, we always have to thank him and butter him up because he's the treasurer. Okay, let me. Huh? Yeah, Mr. Falina. This is where the money is. Very important guy. Let me say just very briefly a few words about each one of my distinguished panel. They have very, very long CVs, so if I missed anything, please forgive me. Dr. Samir Saran is president of ORF, as I said, which is India's premier think tank, headquartered in New Delhi, with affiliates in North America, and they actually have a branch in the Middle East in Dubai. His research focus on issues of global governance, climate and energy policy, technology policy, and India's foreign policy. He curates the Raisina Dialogue, India's annual flagship platform on geopolitics and geoeconomics, and is founder of Sci-Fi, CYFY or Sci-Fi? Sci-Fi, okay. India's annual conference on cybersecurity and internet governance. He spearheads the foundation's efforts to foster new international partnerships and incubate young leaders, networks, and youth-led conversations globally. Samir has authored 4 books, edited important journals and publications, and written several academic papers here all over the world, I have to tell you, in case you didn't know. He's featured regularly in Indian international print and broadcast media. His latest publications include The New World Disorder and the Indian Imperative, with Sashi Tharoor, and Pax Sisenia, Implications for the Indian Dawn, with Akhil Deo. Mr. Sanjoy Joshi, chairman of ORF. He has the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi, as its chairman and chief executive. He has, over the last 10 years, spearheaded the rise of the ORF as India's premier think tank and window into the world of global affairs. He joined the Madhya Pradesh cadre of the Indian Administrative Services in 1983, took premature retirement in 2009 in order to pursue his academic interests. Okay, it takes a lot of guts to do that, by the way. He has been visiting associate at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, London, and distinguished visitor of the program on energy and sustainable development, University of Stanford, United States of America. He speaks and publishes and comments on the world of technology, energy, and development, framing them in the context of global shifts and the challenges of growth and employment faced by emerging economies. He has regular YouTube commentary on global and current affairs called India's World, which is also available as a podcast. Okay, on the Egyptian side, let me start by His Excellency Mohammed Abdul Hamid Ibrahim Higazi, a former Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Higazi is currently the advisor to the Minister of Local Development for International Cooperation, and he's a professor of political science at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University. Previously, he held various esteemed diplomatic positions, including Ambassador of Egypt to Germany, India, and Jordan. Okay, so he belongs to the Indian group on this side, and he has a PhD in political science from Macquarie University in Australia. Next, we have, hold on, it's a big panel, so there are lots of papers. Please forgive me. Okay, Mr. Tariq Osman, Senior Political Counselor for the Arab World, EBRD. Prior to that, Tariq spent 10 years in strategy consulting, corporate finance, and private equity. Tariq Osman is the author of the international best-selling Egypt on the Brink from Yale 2010 and Islamism, Yale 2017. He wrote and presented several documentary series for BBC, Radio 4, and a program on foreign affairs for CNN Arabic. He contributed chapters to the European Commission's second strategic plan 2023 and to the EU strategy and policy analysis system 2017. His articles have regularly appeared in Foreign Affairs, Times, Japan, Times, Ahram Weekly, among many others. So we have people who are very famous with us here. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Ala Hashim, family member of ECS, founder and executive partner at Transcendium, very, very entrepreneurial in everything he does. Okay. He is a co-founder and executive partner of Transcendium, a boutique management services firm focused on large-scale business transformations. He's also the chairman of Delicious Cilantro, the cilantro coffee you bring up with you. It belongs to him, actually. Ala serves on several boards, including Giza Seeds, Herbs, Cargolniks, and BTEC. He has a background in mathematics and previously served in multiple roles in the industry, rising to co-CEO of Mac Carpet. He is also involved in various committees and organizations, including the Industry Committee at the AmCham of Egypt, the Egypt-US Business Council, and Educate Me. Ala teaches business planning and strategy at AUC and serves on its Dean Strategic Advisory Board. And as I said, and I repeat, very important, he's the treasurer of ECS. Very, very important. Okay, all right. Having introduced the very, very respectable panel, let's now start. So I start with you, Mr. Sanjoy, with your initial comments.
Thank you, Abla. Just some brief comments before the main event, which is Samir's talk, which you shall hear shortly. I was very struck, Abla, by the timeline you had put in your introductory slide about the India-Egypt partnership. And actually, we start looking at it. India and Egypt go back before history. It is not something which is just a matter of the non-aligned movement. It's not a matter of just what happened post India's independence. We go back millennia, not even centuries. And the reason we go back is not really to do with who we are, what we are. It is really to do with the geography, the face of the earth, where we sit on. And it is, in a way, when you start talking of this partnership, it's a partnership made beyond our hands. And whatever we do, we cannot run away from it. For the simple reason, when I say that, start looking at it. Long before the annals of Marco Polo, when he spoke of the Silk routes and everything else, and long before well, Christopher Columbus ever dawned upon the face of the earth. And you have this catalog, this logbook called the Periple Mar Erythrae. This region, from the Red Sea to the Arabian to the Indian Ocean, was called the Erythraean Sea. We divided up into Saudi Arabia, India, these parts much later. It was called the Erythraean Sea. It was one sea. It was not an ocean. It was called the one sea. And trade plied on these routes right at that time. And this logbook, written by an Egyptian sailor, it's not very well written, but it has been deciphered. It's got a lot of wrong Latin and wrong Greek. He knew some Latin and some Greek, and he mixed them up quite a lot. But yes, it can be deciphered. It has very detailed account of where the ships went to, which were the ports, how long it took, what goods were they carrying. It's a complete logbook. And it talks of various ports, right of Zanzibar, right here in Alexandria, and it ends up in Kondingalur in Kerala, where the Periyar River meets the Arabian Sea. And it's an extremely detailed account. Now, this trade flourished actually far beyond this. This is 1st century AD. The date of this logbook has been fixed as the 1st century AD. It was written sometime in the mid 1st century, about 50 years after Christ, AD. But even before that, the Assyrian Empire, the Phoenician trade, it was a trade which was blown by the monsoons. You did not have a choice. The face of the earth, the way the earth moved, the trade winds, these were the favorable routes for shipping to be maintained along this part of the world. And so trade flourished. It did not flourish because of governments, it did not flourish because of states. States, yes, collected taxes. They were very happy when merchants came. It enriched them. But trade was something which happened between people. And this particular location in Kerala, Kondingalur, which at some point was also mentioned as the Rome of the East during the Greco-Roman days. This location actually became the entry point for the 3 major religions of the world. Whether it be Islam. Islam actually entered somewhere in India long, long ago, very shortly after Prophet Muhammad. It landed up there. Christianity. Thomas Aquinas. That is where he arrives. Judaism. And Hinduism, yes, the home religion in that country. So there was a happy mix of how these religions progressed. The short point I'm trying to make is, globalization was not invented in Davos. Globalization existed long before Davos ever happened. I mean, that version of globalization just lasted 1 generation. There are versions of globalization which lasted centuries, millennia. And they were really built on open free trade. The Davos version of globalization had a very short life. I mean, it suddenly ended in 2008. And it tried to sell us this very Cinderella story of where the entire developing world, China included at that point of time, became the scullery maid, the factories of the world, which produced cheap goods for Western markets. And that is how globalization moved. As long as there were profits to be made in that, the narrative succeeded. And then suddenly, at the stroke of midnight, 2008, midnight strikes. The glitzy coach, they were all rising, becomes a pumpkin coach. The mice scamper away, which is the free markets and all this talk about free trade and free markets. They just scamper away and vanish. And no one talks about that globalization anymore. Every state today has become far more interventionist. Free trade is gone. States are intervening. You have CBAM. You have IRA. Every state is trying to look at the whole world of trade very differently. So it's a challenging time. Now we come to modern times. Non-aligned movement. What were the countries of non-aligned movement really trying to do? In a world which was split up into a world of black and white, between the good guys and the bad guys, non-aligned movement was trying to chart a common course, trying to find a mid ground, saying we are not here, that we want to make our own world in our own image. It was a very different world then. But yes, that is the time the partnership which you mentioned between President Nasser and President Nehru flourished. India and Egypt became very close. And then, yes, globalization happened. We all started looking westward. We kind of drifted apart. Now the world has changed again post-2020. We are back into a very different kind of geopolitics. And yes, where we are located, both our countries, we are going to be at the storm center of much of these happenings. We are going to be affected by them. Now, how do we navigate that space? That is something, a very important question which arises for all of us. And that is why the whole topic which Abla has, this problem, which has been problematized and thrown at Samir today to solve for this afternoon, and that is where it arises from. It is an extremely challenging time. But within this, there are lots of opportunities, there are lots of threats. And if the partnership has to go forward, we have to see and kind of needle out, dig out the opportunities that exist between us, and there are lots of them. We've been, during this whole 1.5 days, we've been talking about some of them. So with this, I will conclude. Samir has a challenging task ahead of him, but the good thing is he's very blunt about it, and you're going to enjoy this talk.
We enjoyed that part. We are certainly going to enjoy the rest. You took us from history to the Cinderella story to the Davis, which came out of nowhere, claiming globalization. Okay, and now we have to navigate. So we're all wearing our life jackets and waiting for you to make us navigate. Okay, go ahead.
No, thank you so much. And let me first thank Mr. Sanjay Joshi for that introduction. And in some sense, the easiest thing for me to do is that the talk is over. You've heard him. And that's the key takeaway for this afternoon. But thank you for that introduction, Mr. Joshi. Let me also acknowledge Ambassador Higazi from Egypt, also someone who was in India and who understands the bilateral relationship intimately, having curated, incubated, preserved it at a critical moment. Let me acknowledge Allah Hashim, founder and executive partner, Transcendium, and of course the treasurer of ECES. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for this opportunity. Tariq Osman from EBRD, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. And I look forward to hearing from you. And of course, my dear friend Abla Abdel Latif, who's a force of nature. She is a irresistible force. And actually, India and Egypt don't have to do too much. They have to just leave Abla onto the world, and she will find the solutions. So we have a hidden solution with us all the time. No, but coming back to and let me of course thank each one of you for joining us this afternoon. I think we are starting a journey here, a journey to rediscover each other in a new moment. We know each other very well. We are very familiar with each other, but this is a time to unpeel some layers of our own individual evolutions so that we can build a partnership that is purposeful at this particular moment that the world confronts. And I think Mr. Joshi has very vividly captured that moment. We have a world where war is now a negotiating tool. So when you don't like something, you don't go to the negotiating table, you go to the battlefield. War is a grammar of conversation, which is becoming a part of everyone's diplomatic playbook. And that's a sad thing. Those who were tasked to guarantee peace are today most likely to use conflict as a means of achieving ends. We have the P5 implicated in the last 20 years. Each one of them has used war as a means of achieving political objectives. Each one of them. The Middle East, more often than not, has been a victim of these actions, this region. And in a odd sort of a way, do not imagine India to be distant from the Middle East. We are a continuum. We are part of the same geography. And when that geography erupts, it implicates us as much. And even though the narratives still appear to be dominated through Western media and Western conversations, the real implications of eruption in this region is in our cities, in our capitals, in our towns, in our peoples. So we have war, which is prevalent and all pervasive. We have weaponization of trade and financial instruments and currencies and banks and institutions meant to help people have now become ways of blackmailing people. So we have that second reality. We have the breakdown of global institutions and global governance as we knew it in the last century completely. There is a lack of legitimacy and trust in any of these institutions. And of course, we are confronted with irrational politics at home, which makes internationalism even more difficult. If domestic politics is going to produce leadership that is going to be serving parochial purposes, it makes it very difficult for it to rise above and respond to planetary challenges or humanitarian crises or even issues that could have long-term and sustainable ends for countries that seek it, that need it, and that are striving for it. So we are in interesting times, and I am going to have two parts to my presentation this afternoon. The first, I'm going to try to delve into each of these through invoking the four big collisions we are experiencing at this time. We are in the middle of a crazy pile-up. We are in the middle of a crash, multiple crashes. People use the word polycrisis, and I think they're being sophisticated. This is not a crisis. This is the head-on collision that we are experiencing in multiple directions. And I'm going to, in the first part of my presentation, look at those four collisions that are significant and we must start thinking about. And then I'm going to try and present a picture for a partnership that I believe whose time has come. And I was just telling the panelists in the green room that we need to make sure that the 2020s and the 2030s in an India-Egypt context are like the 1950s and the 1960s. The world needs it. We are always the stabilizers. And as Mr. Joshi mentioned in his opening remarks, what we really did in the 1950s, and Abla was in some sense in an ironic way suggesting that perhaps countries like ours, who not many people will give a chance to, can find that solution that the time requires. In the 1950s and 60s, we did it. We prevented the world from squeezing room to maneuver from developing and emerging countries. We created the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement was basically the space we created for countries to breathe. The Soviet Union and the Americans were pulling oxygen out of the room. Agency had been denied to people, to countries, to nations. And the non-aligned movement was a way of reclaiming agency, of letting us have a chance to decide our own paths. It was the most liberal architecture at the time of illiberalism that was being defined by two big powers. It was a democratic project. It was a project to defend global democratic existence. And in some sense, I'm going to argue that this moment offers us, or rather compels us, to rise to the occasion and again create an architecture that does not get polarized into the corners that the big powers want the world to be in. It is time again to reject their definition and their architecture of this world and to build a space that we feel comfortable in. And by the way, it need not be the same. Each country could have its own choice. And that choice is what we are going to have to defend in the next 15 years, in the next 15 years, because it is under threat. So let me talk about the four collisions. The first collision, I call it the collision of geographies. Our map is colliding. It's in a high-speed collision. When I was born, I was very lucky. I had a country which had an ocean named after it. Very few people have that. Only 1.4 billion people have that. And all our politics and our imagination and our stories and our romances and our tragedies were around that water body. Indian Ocean was central to who we were. It defined us. Those who are born today perhaps will not hear about the Indian Ocean that much in India. They will hear the term Indo-Pacific. In the last decade, we have seen the birth of this new political geography called the Indo-Pacific. Don't disregard the consequences of its rise and its birth. It changes the politics of that region completely. It compels us to think of a new institutional arrangement to manage it. It has implications on the cultural underpinnings of that region. East Asian culture, South Asian culture, West Asian culture, all very distinct, very difficult to define through a single common grammar, vocabulary, and lens. And yet, the Indo-Pacific has become the most important political brand to define the times we live in my part of the world. The Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean have collided. Their cultures, their economics, their politics, their conflicts are all infecting my region and mine theirs. The ice melts and the Arctic will flow into the Pacific and will flow into the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic will circle the Eurasian continent. Eurasia is also colliding. Asia and Europe are colliding with each other like never before. Expansionist power, China, and I'm going to name it, is redrawing boundaries for its purpose, is investing in infrastructure to connect to its economic needs, is defining the rules-based orders, rewriting the rules-based order in many parts of this region for its purposes. And we have others in regional and sub-regional areas doing the same. It's not the only one. There are many others who are also doing this. It's not unique in its attempt to reshape this large landmass to benefit its own political and economic aspirations. We are seeing regional actors do the same. And again, you are seeing contests flare up in the continent. We all kept focusing on the maritime space, but what we have witnessed in the last 4 or 5 years are land conflicts. We have the Russians in Ukraine. We have what's happening in the Middle East on a daily basis, visible to all of us. We saw what happened in Afghanistan a few years ago. We are seeing land conflicts gain prominence even as we were focusing on the seas. So there is a continental collision underway where land wars and conflicts that we thought we had rejected in the last century are back in vogue again. And institutionally, we are far weaker in being able to contain, manage, and resolve these due to all the other factors that Mr. Joshi had mentioned: a polarized polity, a bipolar or a dysfunctional world order, legitimacy and trust as far as the UN and other institutions are concerned. We find it very difficult to manage this collision. So this is the first collision, the collision of political geographies, the emergence of new geographies as well, the Indo-Pacific, a case in point, but many other facts as well. The second collision is the collision, what I call is the collision between the real and the virtual. We live in the real world and we are implicated by what we do online. The online is no longer a tool, it is no longer a platform, it is our life. There are consequences. What happens online can kill people, can cripple countries and economies, can create cultural and ideological and identity feuds, can divide societies. This is not future tense, it has already happened. The collision between the virtual and the real has implicated us like never before and at a pace that we are unable to keep up with. One of the most important works of Samuel Huntington was not Clash of Civilizations. He wrote a book in 1968, Political Order in Changing Societies, where he had warned that if change happened at a certain pace, societies and institutions are going to be unable to keep up. That's already upon us. We are imploding from within due to this high-speed collision of the virtual and the real. And that's the second collision that forms the backdrop of the world we need to navigate. The third is the collision between people and planet. The climate crisis is upon us. It is not again future tense. We are seeing disruptive events. We are seeing all sorts of extreme weather events taking place in this region, in South Asia, in Canada, in Australia, forest fires like never before, hurricanes, cyclones, droughts, downpours, and sudden rainfall that's flooding cities. The planet is angry. It's had enough and it's hitting back. It's a real crisis. And it's not about setting up solar energy projects or green hydrogen. People are in distress, they are dying. Adaptation is the call of the hour. We have to build societies that can adapt to what is already upon us, even as we find ways to mitigate future emissions. But responding to the crisis already upon us is something that is very real and requires foresight and considered political leadership. And that's the third collision, the collision between people and planet, playing out on a daily basis with deleterious and disastrous consequences for the individual. And climate does not recognize either your borders or your passports. And the idea that somehow this is going to be a problem for the third world or for the developing world or for the poor countries is rubbish. It's a matter of time before a developed country goes down under. One of these big events takes down one of these big cities. You saw what the pandemic did. It was meant to be something that would kill the poor. And look what happened in London and New York and Washington and Paris and Milan and every other developed city. Systemic crisis does not look at your per capita income. It levelizes the world, and we have to find, therefore, global solutions to many of these problems. And the fourth collision is what I would call, and we were again discussing this a little earlier, is the collision between, and I say this with a little bit of care, but it is certainly a collision. It is a collision of narratives. The North versus the South, the West versus the rest, the developed world versus the emerging world, the G7 versus the BRICS. It has been painted in many different ways depending on which location you are in the world. But certainly what is happening now is that the hunted are learning how to tell the story of the hunt. The hunter's view is now no longer the legitimate and the valid view. The hunted are also telling their side of the story. This is the Swahili saying that the story of the hunt will always be told by the hunter till the tiger learns how to write. The tiger has learned how to write. Social media, YouTube, digital platforms, the proliferation of handheld devices across all our geographies allow us the opportunity to tell our stories. And boy, are we telling our stories. So the fourth collision that we are underway, and this is important because a dominant narrative was a precondition for a stable political and global order. If there is no dominant order, if there is no dominant narrative, can there be a rules-based order? And I think that's a fundamental question. If we do not agree on what the world should be or who we are and what we strive for, then how can we write the rules for the road? If we don't know where we are heading, it's difficult to agree on how to get to that destination. And these four collisions and many more, in many ways, define the world where I argue it is imperative for a whole new coalition of actors to step up, take charge, and recast, reform, and sometimes create institutions that will serve us in the 21st century. Now, why do I say this? Why do I say that it is time for a new cast of characters and new voices and new actors to take the reins of defining the future for the world? I say this for three reasons. And they can be defined through names of countries. Indonesia, India, and now Brazil. Each of them a country from the south, an emerging power, a developing country. Each of them outside the global high table. And each of them delivering a G20 that could not have been delivered by any G7 country. Indonesia saved the G20. Had a European country been hosting it, G20 would have died that year. because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Europe would have forgotten everything about global governance and serving the planet and saving the world and saving people, and would have narrowed down the scope of the G20 to the Russia conflict and made sure that no one participated. There was no outcome, there was no resolution, there was no consensus, and there was no step taken to progress on key matters of climate, key matters. The Indians, despite the conflict having become worse during its presidency, were able to add ambition to the G20 and made development a center pillar of G20. The G20 had been the bankers' G20, the rich countries' G20. In the Indian presidency, it became the G20 for the streets. It became a development G20, where the SDGs took center stage, where technology for good, where women empowerment, where SMEs and all other issues of livelihood and stability of human well-being became the main agenda items for that particular grouping. And equality, one of the collaterals of globalization of the time period that Mr. Joshi defined, of the globalization that ended in 2008. One of the biggest collaterals was global equality. We have never seen such concentration of power and wealth in such few hands as we saw in the last run of globalization. And Brazil has taken it upon itself to bring equality back to that debate and to the agenda of the highest global governance conversations today. And these three countries tell us that if you have different actors taking charge, we can have a more wholesome agenda, we can have consensus, and we can have resolutions at a time when the world is so polarized. Any European, American, Atlantic country would not have been able to achieve these outcomes that the Indonesians, Indians, and Brazilians are able to do so. It tells us that the old order and its guardians now need to be pensioned off and retired. And a whole new cast of characters need to step up and add their energy, their aspirations, and their ambitions to global governance. In 1950s and 60s, India and Egypt formed an unlikely partnership made only possible by the geography that both exist. And that's something that Mr. Joshi already explained, that you cannot wish us away and we cannot wish you away. Our futures are interlinked through that water bodies which was defined in a certain way in the previous millennium. But in my view, I call it the four body solution for the future. I call it the Indo-Pacific and the Med-Atlantic future. The Mediterranean and the Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. These four oceans or these four seas or these four water bodies will have to find, within these four water bodies, you will find the solution of the future of globalization, future of peace, future of trade, future of economic prosperity, and everything else in between. India and Egypt have to curate this new architecture that connects the vibrancy and the economic growth of the Indo-Pacific with the opportunities of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean systems. And between the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea lies the median or the center of everything else that is going to be organized around it. So yes, Abla, while we cannot be the solution for everything, I think this is that time when India and Egypt can be the arena where the future is discovered. It is in our rich traditions that gave birth to the first rounds of globalization that Mr. Joshi had alluded to, of exchanges on culture, exchanges on cuisines, exchanges on costumes and everything else. We now need to refine that spirit that animated us thousands of years ago and build a partnership of the future. Now, I am proposing 5 ideas for a partnership. If we need to start doing this, we need to have an agenda. And I think the first agenda is obvious and selects itself. We have to move from being the incubators of non-alignment to being the defenders of multi-alignment. We will partner with all who we want to on what we want to. and no ideological or politically charged argument coming from anyone else must reduce the agency of any individual nation to make that choice. So, from an era of non alignment to an era of multi alignment. And I think a very important element of this multi alignment is captured by both of us having robust partnerships with the EU and the US, perhaps the most important partnerships with the EU and the US, and yet both of us finding it very useful to be part of the BRICS as well. For us, BRICS is not anti Western, BRICS is non Western. And there is a big difference. In fact, when many of my friends in Europe and America ask me that why is India part of BRICS when China is a part of BRICS, I said precisely for that region, that we are part of BRICS. Because this is not a Chinese grouping. This is a grouping of emerging global south countries, of those who are not in the mainstream, of those who have been kept outside the high tables. It is a group of those countries. This is not a China group. It is our presence, countries like Egypt and India, that makes BRICS a vibrant platform, that allows it to be a diverse platform, that allows it to represent a kaleidoscope of aspirations of countries far and wide. So the first is that can we shape and institutionalize a multi-alignment agenda that will refuse to be drawn into the blue corner or the red corner. And I think that's a partnership which is an India-Egypt global partnership. The second, I spoke about the collision between people and planet. And this new multi-alignment partnership must have an ethic. That ethic could be about a just green transition. You had a very successful Conference of Party meeting here, you hosted it in Egypt. We are one of the fastest moving green installation destination. We have promised to install in the next 6 years renewable capacities that are twice the total installed capacity of Germany today, at a very low per capita GDP. It's a big promise that we have undertaken to contribute to the global cause. And between us, can this new multi-alignment not just be a political slogan and a statement, but can it do good? Can it have virtues and attributes such as green transitions, development ambitions and aspirations? And can we be the champions of a world that is green, that is more equal, and that serves the next 6 billion? The Atlantic system served the first 1 billion. We have to serve the 6 billion who are still not catered to in this new world order. And I think that should be the second agenda item. Having purpose define this multi-aligned world. A world without purpose is adrift. And we need purposes. The third agenda item must reflect on our existing reality. We are largely young countries, big countries. We have a population that is ambitious, that has aspirations, and that must be catered to. Our growth is not going to happen in an American-style format of the 19th and 20th century, powered by fossil fuel through unsustainable business transactions and connections, or through the Chinese model of cheap manufacturing and export to the world. Is going to happen in a revolution that is going to be largely technology-led, is going to be digital, we are going to be the first countries who are going to move to a developed nation or a middle-class nation status, middle-income country status in the fourth industrial revolution, if that's the way you want to define it, or in the digital age. And in that sense, the rules of the digital age, the rules on privacy, the rules on data, the rules on speech, the rules on surveillance, we have to be the scripters of those rules. It is our growth that is going to be implicated by them. We in India proposed the digital public goods agenda, the DPI initiative, where we try to take away the powers from monopolistic enterprises and make data sets available to public for public purposes. We have spawned a whole generation of entrepreneurs. We have a number of unicorns and SMEs that have risen to become large digital actors based on the conditions that our policymakers and regulators are able to develop in that country. And I can see from some conversations I've had yesterday and today that there is an ambition in Egypt to rise in the digital value chains rapidly as well. And this area, our digital future that serves not only the two countries, but serves, again, the next 6 billion who are going to have to rely on the same means to transform their lives, becomes an important point of a partnership that we must see for the future. Our partnership must be green, development focused, and digital. We must be the rules maker for any new digital order that emerges, because digital for us is livelihoods. It is actually the first responder to all our governance needs. Most of us will never meet bureaucrats. We will probably experience governments on our handsets, through AI and other automated services. And we must make sure that that digital transformation becomes a central part of our partnership. Fourth, we've been hearing over the last 1.5 days and over the last few years on the policy signals coming out of Brussels, coming out of countries like the UK, but certainly even the United States, that show that they have given up on globalization that they built and they created. Industrial policies like the Inflation Reduction Act or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or even Donald Trump's Make America Great Again approach to everything political, tell us that gains from globalization that had to be had by those countries have been acquired, and now they are no longer interested in that project anymore. Unfortunately, countries like Egypt and India need globalization at this time. We need global interconnectedness. We need global trade. We need global value chains. We need to partner more deeply with geographies around the world. It is incumbent upon us to fashion a new age of globalization, to invest in new formats. Could be plurilateral, could be multilateral, could be bilateral, could be regional. But we must find ways of continuing to ensure that our people connect with each other to rise together, that financial flows reach the last mile, that production and manufacturing from small countries and small cities and small towns are available in global marketplaces, using technology, using instruments and services that many of our own cities and centers today offer. We must become the new flag bearers of globalization of tomorrow. Do not expect New York, Paris, and London to put the same energy and the same resources to build that for you. We are going to be the largest beneficiaries of this age of globalization. We have to spend on it. We have to invest on it. We have to, our political leadership must recognize the importance of doing that. And finally, we have to reclaim intellectual property. It's very important. And this partnership should be about reclaiming many of our ideas that had surreptitiously been captured and owned by others. For example, stolen is too harsh, but maybe. For example, we already discussed that globalization is not a Western invention. It was built here, where I'm sitting. It is our project. And unless we reclaim its ownership, we will not invest in it. But that's only one of the ideas that we need to reclaim. Liberalism is not a Western concept. modernity is not a Western concept. Are you kidding me? It is here where modern societies were born, modern states were born, modern democracies were fashioned. And yet we have allowed modernity to be seen as a Western ideal. No, modernity is our ideal. Reclaim it and define it. Liberalism is our ideal. It's colonial interventions that divided societies. We were far more plural, far more syncretic, far more accommodative before interventions from outside. As long as we see liberalism as Western, we have a different reflex to it. When we see liberalism as authentic and indigenous, then we have a different approach to it. We have to reclaim it. Science, innovation, knowledge. Our project, and I think this is something that we've been discussing as well. Our project in the days ahead as partner countries has to be to dig into our histories, into our traditions, into who we are, and fashion a modern society for the future. I am not seeking status quo. I am not seeking the defense of yesterday. I am seeking an acknowledgement of yesterday so that tomorrow can be more considered and can be more authentic, more indigenous, more local, more contextual. It's time to reclaim what was taken away from us. Our ideas were taken away from us. We have to reclaim the ideas that belong to us. Only if we can reclaim those ideas can we invest in them. So our partnership has to be based on these attributes. And I think the 1920s and the 1930s may well be those two decades in this century, as the 50s and 60s were the 2 decades in the last century that allowed all of us room to breathe, room to maneuver, room to choose. And I think choice is what our partnership defends, and choice is why we must partner each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very insightful speech. I feel proud already, seriously, the proudness of having had a great past and that we need to revive that past and regain what's ours. Very, very, very enlightening from the crashes and the collusions that exist, the 4 items and the areas where we need to work on. It's very impressive. Thank you so much, Samir, for a great, great speech.